there's a reason why it's so important to have a vision of yourself or a vision of the goals that you're trying to achieve and to understand exactly what it is that you're trying to achieve. And the reason why that vision becomes so important is because you're actually building on it, right? So, let's say that you want to be a better mother, or you want to be, a better spouse, or you want to be a better employee, or you really want to have this sort of career, and you want to be respected or valued or admired for what you do and all of those things. You hold an idea in your head of what it is. So, a lot of times, especially like in manifestation, you'll just kind of hear like, oh, sit down and meditate upon it, and have this thing in your head, and it's spoken about like it's all in your imagination, and that is the conception of it. The conception of it is in your imagination. The reason why it becomes more important to go back and forth with this imaginal thing, to keep going into your imagination, to keep living it, to keep feeling into it, to keep building on it, is because you're essentially creating a character. You're narrating the story to go in that direction. Because what will happen is the more and more that you go into it, whether it be imagination, some people like to just sit down and meditate and imagine where they're trying to get to, what it would feel like to be married, what it would feel like to live in California, what it would feel like to, you know, have that job that you're going for, or whatever the goal is that you're trying to reach. You first have to imagine it. And once you imagine it, you should write it down, because that kind of like hardwires it a little bit into your brain. And as you write, some layers of it may start to come out. And that's essentially what you're doing when you're going into imagination, or when you're writing it down. First off, you're occupying all of your senses, which means that you're putting more into it than just this visual aspect. So now you're starting to let your mind think about it. You're starting to create feelings associated with it. And having a very, very clear vision is going to help you align to that vision, because the clearer you can get into that vision. So what ends up happening is, we'll sit down to imagine what we're trying to achieve, and that feels good to us. But the more and more we go into this act, the more and more we start to layer upon it. The more and more we start to build into like the characteristics that we would have if we were in fact living that life. Like let's take just for instance, you want to get married and you want to be a good wife. You have an idea of what that means. There's already some sort of perception in your head of that. But how does a good wife act? What are the characteristics that a good wife would have? What are the characteristics that a wife would have that's supportive of her husband? And so you start to layer in these other aspects to it, like, what would I want my marriage to look like? How do I want my home to feel? And as you start to add all of these layers in, and you're essentially kind of creating this character in your mind, what eventually starts to happen is it translates into your real life. So you now start to act and feel more and more like that person who's living that life, because you have created that character in your mind. And now what will happen is that all of your actions, all of your behaviors, all of your words, all of your choices and decisions will align to this world that you're creating internally. And so eventually that world will push out externally, because you've now essentially changed the character of yourself. You just wrote a new script. You wrote a new character. You gave yourself new traits. You gave yourself new things that aligned to that thing that you were trying to accomplish, right? Like, we all know, like, if we want to get somewhere, there's a different set of traits that usually goes with it, especially if we're moving up, right? Or, if you really want to make it into management in your company, how managers act, what's required of you as a employee to then be that person. And so you start to just naturally shift and create that sort of energy in your everyday life. And it kind of becomes who you are even before you are it. That's where, in manifestation, we talk about you have to be it before you'll receive it. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about you really getting so enmeshed in that vision of yourself, of what you're trying to achieve, and really embracing all the feelings and the traits and all of the embodiment of it already. And so, you're not even questioning now if you're management material, or if you're wife material, or if you're good husband material, or whatever, because your values and your behaviors and your thoughts are all going to line up in that direction, because you've made that the only direction you want. So you're not going to do anything that's out of character with that direction. You're more inclined to stay in line with that direction the more and more you go into this little visual world of yours, because anything that's out of line with this new character, or that's out of line with that direction that you're trying to achieve, you're just automatically not going to give into those sort of things anymore, because you know that you want to get here. It's become just your only direction. You've eliminated all of the other possibilities and went in this one direction. Now, that doesn't mean that you won't have other opportunities arise that may not line up to that erection, to that erection, excuse me, that may not align to that direction, but you're still ultimately most likely going to pick that. Sorry, I can't get over what I just said. So you still may have other opportunities that come up that don't necessarily align to the direction that you were originally trying to go in, but the characteristics and chances are the opportunities that do align up to you now will still be within that same sort of funnel that you've just created with yourself. So visualization is half of it, but it's important to continually go back into the visualization and to keep realigning who you want to be to that visualization. It's also important to write it out, and so that you are bringing all your senses into it. You're getting a feel for it. You're, adding these layers, and you're recreating your characteristics and your traits and your things. And so now you're becoming more aligned to a future self. And the more and more you can align to that, the more and more you can embody that, the more and more it really becomes the only direction you will have, because all of your beliefs, all of your thoughts, all of your behaviors and actions and values will align to that new creation that you have in your mind. And it's also important to remember that as you're building these things, you are deciding the character of the future self that you want to be. You're deciding the values that you want to take into your future. You're deciding what kind of life you want to have in the future, what kind of career, what kind of home, depending on what your goals are, right? So in all those decisions, you're deciding, well, how would I be treated if I was in that role? And how would I behave in that role? And what are the things and the attributes that I want to bring to that role? And what values do I think somebody who's in that role has? Or what values would I like to bring to that role? And so you're really developing this full character, and you are deciding that that's who your future self is. And the more and more you go back and visit that future self, the more and more you get acquainted with it, the more and more you start to embody it in who you are presently. And then eventually it just kind of pushes out into your future because you've actually become it. So when people say, you have to be it before you can see it, well, that's what they mean. You have to embody it. You have to take it on. You have to start developing those traits and values and characteristics. And then all of your behavior naturally aligns to it. All of your decision making, all of your actions, all of your thoughts, all of your words will start to align to that new vision of yourself. So you're writing a character. You're re-narrating your story. You're re-narrating who you are. You're taking on the traits of who this new character would be. And so now you're aligned to a different value system. You're aligned to a different future. You're aligned to a different aspect of yourself. And that's how you start to move your life and move the needle more in the direction of where you would like to go.